"We're done. Don't call. Don't come over." That text lit up my phone the morning of my wedding. No greeting, no explanation, just a verdict from my own father. Outside, sunlight flashed over Norfolk Harbor. Inside, my hands shook as I buttoned my dress blues. I'm Emily Hayes, a United States Navy commander, and on the happiest day of my life, my parents left 2 front-row seats empty and sent a sentence instead. My father always said, "No man wants to marry a woman in uniform." He proved his point by not showing up. But he forgot one thing. I've spent 15 years steering through storms without his permission. The man waiting at the altar, Vice Admiral Thomas Walker, knew how to steady a ship and a heart. And the world was about to see exactly who I became when family pride tried to sink me. Have you ever been cut off by the people who should have stood up for you? Tell me in the comments if you felt that kind of betrayal. And stay with me, because this story doesn't end where he tried to finish it. I used to think silence was just peace in disguise, but in my family, silence was a weapon. Every time my father disapproved, he didn't yell, he vanished. No calls, no messages, just that icy distance that said louder than words, "You've disappointed me again." When I told him I'd been accepted to Annapolis, he looked up from his steak and said, "The Navy? That's cute. You'll grow out of it." I didn't. Instead, I grew into it. Every push-up, every deployment, every lonely night on a steel deck beneath foreign skies. I kept waiting for one message, one sign he'd changed his mind. It never came. Meanwhile, my brother Ethan became the golden son. Law degree, golf weekends, country club charm. Dad used to toast him at dinners, saying, "That's my boy, a Hayes man knows where he belongs." Then he'd glance at me, uniform pressed, hair cropped short, and add, "And my daughter, well, she's doing whatever it is she does out there." Everyone would laugh politely. I'd smile too, because crying never changed his tone. Mom was the quiet referee, forever smoothing napkins and pretending not to hear. Once, after Dad called my promotion a publicity stunt, she slipped an envelope into my duffel bag before deployment. Inside was a photo of us at the beach when I was little, her handwriting on the back. "Be safe. I'm proud, even if he can't say it." That single sentence kept me alive through storms and gunmetal dawns. 15 years later, I was still chasing a ghost called approval. When my engagement to Thomas became public, the gossip spread faster than any press release. "You're marrying your superior officer?" my father hissed over the phone. "What will people think?" I wanted to say, "They'll think I finally found someone who respects me." Instead, I said, "They'll think love doesn't care about rank." He hung up. So when the wedding day came and those 2 seats stayed empty, I told myself it was expected. But expectation doesn't dull pain. It just numbs it long enough to break differently. After the ceremony, guests cheered, champagne sparkled, and I posed for photos that looked like joy. Yet every flash of the camera burned a reminder. I was celebrating without the people who should have stood beside me. I cut the cake, smiled for the crowd, and whispered to Thomas, "They didn't even text." He placed his hand over mine. "Then this moment isn't for them. It's for you." That night, while everyone danced, I slipped away to the dock. The harbor shimmered gold, waves soft against the pier. I dialed my parents one more time. The call rang twice before cutting off. No voicemail, no goodbye. Just the echo of my own heartbeat and the sea. I stared at my reflection in the water, dress blues, medals, everything I'd earned, and realized how heavy pride could feel when it wasn't mine. I'd spent half my life trying to build a bridge toward people who never looked back. When Thomas found me, I was still holding my phone, knuckles white. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel like it, because you're still fighting a war that ended years ago." I looked up. "Then why does it still hurt?" He smiled sadly. "Because you're human before you're a soldier." The next morning, the sun rose over the harbor, painting light across the waves. I brewed coffee, watched the ships depart, and told myself to let go. But grief isn't obedient. It lingers, like the hum of engines in the distance, like words unsent. Weeks later, when our wedding photo went viral, when strangers called me a symbol of courage and grace, I couldn't help but think, funny. The world salutes me, but my father never did. And maybe that was the cruelest irony. Sometimes the medals mean less than the silence of the people you earned them for. After the wedding, life settled into a rhythm that only the military understands. Early mornings, endless reports, deployments always looming like weather on the horizon. Thomas and I built something steady amid the noise, shared duty, quiet dinners, and an unspoken promise that love could survive long distances. But even peace has ghosts. Every month, I'd send a small package home, letters, photos, sometimes a souvenir from whatever port we docked in. None were ever acknowledged. Once, Mom finally replied, just 3 words, "We're doing fine." No mention of my marriage, no congratulations, no warmth. Still, I kept writing. It was the only way I knew how to keep a bridge from collapsing entirely. Thomas never told me to stop, but I could see the concern behind his eyes. "You keep knocking on a door that's locked from the inside," he said once. "One day, you'll bruise too much to keep trying." "I know," I said. "But if I stop, then they win." He never argued after that. Duty took us overseas for 6 months. Disaster relief in the Caribbean, logistics command in Guam. Days blurred into checklists and salt water. At night, when the ship went quiet, I'd stand on deck, staring at constellations I'd memorized as a child. I used to name them after my father's lessons, Orion for courage, Polaris for focus. Now, they just felt like witnesses to everything unspoken between us. When our mission in Puerto Rico ended, we returned home to Norfolk. Jenna, my best friend since the academy, dropped by our quarters with wine and that familiar half-smile. "You're trending again," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Apparently, the internet can't get enough of America's Navy couple." I laughed. If only they knew half of it. She raised an eyebrow. "Your dad still silent?" "Completely. Guess I'm better at saving strangers than relationships." She frowned. "You're not responsible for his pride." Tell that to the little girl who spent 20 years trying to earn a smile. Jenna leaned back. "Then maybe it's time you stopped waiting for one." That night, Thomas found me on the porch, scrolling through comments under the viral post. People praised our service, our devotion. None of them saw the missing piece. "You read too deep into strangers," he said gently. "Maybe," I admitted, "but sometimes strangers see me clearer than my family ever did." He put an arm around me. "Then build your own family, Commander. One that salutes who you are, not who they wanted." So we did. We spent weekends sailing the Chesapeake, growing lilies in the small garden behind our house, laughing about deployment food and storm drills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Yet even then, the ache never completely left. It lived quietly like a scar under dress fabric, healed but sensitive. Then one evening, Jenna burst into our kitchen holding her phone. "Emily, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me. There was my father's face on a family group photo. My wedding picture beside it. Someone had shared the viral post to our hometown network. Underneath, a caption, "Our hometown girl, Commander Hayes, so proud." My heart froze. "He shared it?" She nodded. "Apparently he's showing it off at the country club." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The man who said don't call or come over was now collecting compliments off a photo he'd refused to stand in. That night, I sat by the window watching the harbor lights shimmer. Thomas joined me, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "So," he said lightly, "he's proud now?" "Maybe," I said, voice brittle. "Or maybe he just wants to borrow my reflection when it makes him look good." Thomas studied me quietly. "You can't control that tide, Emily. Only how you steer." "I know." I stared at the horizon. "But part of me still wants him to mean it." He nodded. "Then maybe let him prove it." Days later, the phone rang. A Texas number. I stared at it until the ringing stopped. Then it rang again. Thomas looked up from the table. "You're going to have to answer eventually." I took a breath and picked up. "Hello?" "Emily." His voice was lower, slower than I remembered. "It's your father." The silence that followed could have swallowed oceans. "I saw your picture," he said finally. "You looked happy." My throat tightened. "You weren't supposed to." He ignored that. "We need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow, you, your mother, Ethan." Command voice, no apology, no warmth, just orders. "Dad!" "Just come home," he said, softer this time. "Please." When the line went dead, I sat there frozen. Thomas reached across the table, covering my hand. "You don't owe him anything," he said. "I know." I swallowed hard. But maybe I owe myself closure. He nodded slowly. Then go. But not as the daughter who left. Go as the woman who came back stronger. That night, I laid out my uniform under the lamplight. Polished, sharp, every ribbon earned. My reflection looked calm, but my heart was a drumline. For the first time, I wasn't dressing to impress him. I was dressing to remind myself who I'd become without his approval. Tomorrow, I would walk back into that house. Not for forgiveness, for truth. When I turned onto that old oak-lined street, it felt like driving straight into a photograph I didn't belong in anymore. The same porch swing, the same roses my mother once begged me to water before I left for Annapolis. Everything smaller now, like time had shrunk the world I'd outgrown. Dad's text had been brief. Family meeting, noon. No apology, just command language, just him. I parked the Navy SUV in front of the house. A few neighbors peeked through curtains. Gossip traveled faster than wind in Beaumont, Texas. I stepped out in full dress blues, ribbons sharp, shoes gleaming. I hadn't worn this uniform for his eyes before, but today it felt like armor. Ethan opened the door, smirking. Well, look who remembered the way home. Nice to see you too, counselor, I said evenly. He looked me up and down. You really wore that? Respect looks good in every room, I said, stepping past him. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, polish, and judgment. Mom stood by the mantel, twisting a handkerchief. Dad sat in his leather chair, his throne of control. He didn't stand. You came, he said flatly. You called. He gestured toward the couch. Sit. I prefer to stand, sir. That word, sir, landed heavier than I meant. His brow tightened. Don't you start that military nonsense in my house. Formality helps me focus, I said quietly. The clock ticked too loud. Then he spoke. You embarrassed this family. I blinked. By getting married? By turning your personal life into a spectacle, he snapped. That picture is everywhere. People are asking if it's true. My daughter marrying her superior officer, a man twice her age. He's not twice my age, I said evenly. And he's a vice admiral who's led more rescue missions than you've sold houses. The words escaped before I could stop them. Mom gasped. Ethan snorted. Dad's face reddened. You always did think you were better than us, he barked. No, I said quietly. You decided I was less. He stood so abruptly the chair groaned. Don't twist this into some morality play, Emily. You left us. I left because you made it clear I wasn't wanted. He slammed his palm on the table. I was trying to protect you. From what? My voice shook. From serving my country? From becoming someone you couldn't control? The fight drained from his shoulders, replaced by something raw. Fear, maybe. Mom whispered, Sweetheart, he didn't mean... Yes, he did, I said gently. And that's okay, because I didn't come here for an apology. Then why did you come? His voice cracked. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A small metal coin glinted under the light. Thomas's challenge coin. To return this, I said. It's a symbol of honor, leadership, integrity, things you once taught me before you forgot what they meant. He stared at it like it burned. I thought I'd show you what your disappointment looks like in real life, I added, because she's doing just fine. The silence that followed was suffocating. The lawnmower outside buzzed somewhere distant, the only sound alive. Mom's voice broke the air. Emily, he just doesn't know how to say he's proud. Then he should learn, I said softly, because I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Dad's voice, smaller now, called, You really married him? Yes, I said without looking back. And he treats me like the officer and the woman you never saw. My hand gripped the doorknob. His next words stopped me cold. Can he come by? He asked quietly. I'd like to meet him properly. I turned halfway. Are you sure you're ready for that? He didn't answer, but his silence had changed. It was no longer hostile. It was humbled. Mom began to cry softly behind him. Ethan stood frozen, unsure what role to play now that the script had flipped. Outside, sunlight hit my metals, scattering reflections across the porch. I pulled out my phone and texted Thomas. He has to meet you. Noon tomorrow. Wear the uniform. His reply came a minute later. Already planned to. Let's finish what you started, Commander. As I drove away, the house shrank in the mirror, but something in my chest lifted. Tomorrow wasn't reconciliation. It was reckoning. The next morning, Norfolk woke under a sky of pale pink and gray, the kind of quiet dawn that feels like a held breath before a storm. Thomas was already dressed when I came downstairs, immaculate in his full dress whites. His silver stars caught every bit of light. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as anyone walking into 7 years of silence," I said, adjusting my collar. He handed me my cover. "Then let's go show them who you really are." The drive to Texas felt endless. Neither of us spoke much. The radio stayed off, the road humming beneath us like the steady pulse of duty. Somewhere past Richmond, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't the daughter returning for approval. I was the woman returning to reclaim her name. When we turned onto my parents' street, I saw curtains shift again. News traveled fast in Beaumont. A convoy of 2 military vehicles parking outside Richard Hayes's house was small-town headline material. Dad was already waiting on the porch wearing his best suit, tie slightly crooked. Mom stood just behind him, wringing her hands. The moment I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the front window. Sharp posture, ribbons aligned, shoes like mirrors. The commander they never wanted to see. Dad's eyes flicked past me to Thomas stepping out from the passenger seat. For a heartbeat, his composure faltered. Thomas moved with quiet authority, each step measured, every motion precise. The white of his uniform glowed against the red brick house, the silver stars impossible to ignore. "Good morning, sir," Thomas said first, extending his hand. Dad hesitated before shaking it. "Vice Admiral Walker," he managed. "Welcome, I didn't expect—" "I'm sure you didn't," Thomas said calmly. "Thank you for inviting us." Inside, everything was the same. The polished furniture, the smell of lemon oil and old Sunday mornings, but heavier somehow. Ethan leaned against the wall, watching like a referee waiting for a fight to restart. Dad gestured stiffly toward the couch. "Please, have a seat." Thomas sat. I stayed standing. "We won't take much of your time," I began. Mom tried a smile. "Emily, you look so grown." "It's okay, Mom," I said softly. "You don't have to fill the silence." Dad cleared his throat. "I suppose congratulations are in order." The words came out brittle. Thomas nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. Your daughter is one of the finest officers I've ever served with." That hit like a missile. Ethan looked away. Mom's eyes filled. Dad's jaw tightened. "I'm sure she's competent," he said, forcing composure. "The Navy seems to think highly of her." Thomas's tone remained calm, but steel hid beneath it. "She earned every ribbon you see. Nothing was handed to her, not even respect." Dad's gaze dropped to the floor. I reached into my folder and placed an envelope on the table. "This is an invitation to my commendation ceremony next month. I'll be receiving the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal." Mom gasped softly. "Oh, Emily." Dad looked between us, torn. "That's quite an honor." "It's service," I said evenly, "not a spectacle." Thomas leaned forward, voice quiet but deliberate. "Sir, I didn't come here as her husband or superior. I came as a man who's seen your daughter lead sailors through chaos, through hurricanes and blackouts, and never ask for praise. She's not someone you need to protect from the world. She's the reason it's a little better." The room went still. The only sound was the ticking clock. Dad swallowed hard, fingers twitching against the chair. "I didn't realize." "No," I said, cutting gently. "You didn't want to." For the first time, he met my eyes without anger. What I saw wasn't rage. It was shame. "Maybe I was wrong," he whispered. Mom's voice trembled. "We were scared, both of us." Thomas nodded. "Fear's natural, ma'am, but staying blind to courage isn't." Dad looked up at him. "You really think she's that remarkable?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I don't think, sir. I know." Something cracked then. The years of control, of pride, of pretending not to care. Dad's shoulders sank. His voice dropped. "Then I owe you both an apology." He stood slowly and extended his hand toward me. For a long heartbeat, I saw not the man who'd banished me, but the one who once held the handlebars of my first bike, who used to say, "Eyes forward, Em. The road's yours." I shook his hand. "I wasn't looking for sorry," I said quietly. "Just respect." His grip trembled. "You have it," he said. Thomas rose beside me, cap under his arm. "Thank you for your time, sir. We'll head out now." Dad nodded. "Thank you for bringing her home." Outside, sunlight washed the porch in gold. For the first time, I didn't feel small walking away. I felt seen. Then Mom appeared in the doorway, something small in her hand. "Emily!" I turned. She held out a brass compass, scratched, worn. "Your old one," she said, voice breaking. "Your father gave it to you before your first Navy camp. I found it in your drawer." I took it gently. "Maybe I still need it." She smiled through tears. "Maybe you already used it." As I reached the car, Thomas opened the passenger door and asked quietly, "You good?" I exhaled slowly. "Better than I expected." He smiled. "Told you, you just had to steer through the tide." As we pulled away, I looked in the mirror one last time. The house was smaller now, no longer a fortress, just a place where something hard had finally cracked open. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving home. I was reclaiming it. The drive back from Texas felt shorter, lighter, as if the miles themselves were exhaling. The silence between Thomas and me wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, like calm seas after a long storm. When we reached Norfolk, I hung my uniform in the closet. It still smelled faintly of cedar and coffee from my parents' living room. My father's handshake replayed in my mind, hesitant, trembling, but real. For years, I had imagined this moment ending in anger or apology. Instead, it ended in something better, understanding. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. "Can we talk? Just us?" I stared at it for a full minute before replying, "Yes." We met that afternoon at a small diner off the highway, the kind with cracked red booths and the smell of burnt coffee that never quite leaves. My father was already there, hat in hand. He looked older, smaller somehow, like pride had finally stopped holding him upright. "Emily," he said when I approached. "Sir," I started, out of habit, then stopped myself and smiled. "Dad." We sat across from each other. The waitress poured coffee. For a moment, it was so ordinary it hurt. He cleared his throat. "That man of yours," he said softly, spoke to me with more respect than I've given anyone in years, including you. I smiled faintly. "He doesn't do anything halfway." "I can see that." He rubbed his temple. "Emily, I owe you an apology." Those words hit harder than any insult ever did. "For what?" I asked. "For not seeing you. For being afraid you'd fail and making that fear your problem instead of mine. For letting pride turn into distance." His voice shook. "Every time you succeeded without me, it felt like proof I wasn't needed. I didn't know how to handle that." I looked at him, the man who'd built walls around his heart and called them discipline. "I never wanted to replace you, Dad. I just wanted you to stand beside me." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Your mother kept your letters, you know. She read them all. I couldn't—" It hurt too much to realize how proud I actually was. I laughed softly. Guess we both carried the wrong kind of silence. He reached into his pocket and placed something small on the table, a tarnished silver pin, my old junior ROTC insignia. "You dropped this the day you left for Annapolis. I kept it, thinking I'd give it back when you quit." I smiled through tears. "Guess I ruined that plan." He chuckled, a real unguarded laugh I hadn't heard since childhood. "You didn't ruin anything. You became everything I hoped you'd be, just not in the way I imagined." Mom joined us then, sliding into the booth with pie and a nervous smile. "I thought maybe we could talk like normal people for once," she said. I reached for her hand. "We're finally on the same side, Mom." Dad nodded. "We'd like to come to your ceremony, if we're invited." I exhaled. "Of course you are. You always were." The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Pentagon courtyard, flags snapping, brass gleaming. I stood before the mirror one last time, adjusting the silver oak leaves on my shoulders. Thomas appeared behind me, his voice steady. "You ready, Commander?" "I think so," I said, smiling. When we entered the hall, I spotted them immediately. Mom clutching a folded flag, Dad straight-backed in the front row. The Master of Ceremonies read my citation, "For exceptional leadership and humanitarian service." The applause felt like waves breaking after a long storm. Thomas pinned the medal over my heart, saluted, and whispered, "You did it, Emily." I looked toward my parents. For the first time, my father's eyes weren't critical. They were proud, wet with tears he didn't hide. Afterward, he approached, voice thick. "I don't think words will cover it." "Try anyway," I teased. He smiled. I'm proud of you, Commander Hayes. That title, from him, meant more than any medal. Later, standing on the bridge over the Potomac, I held the compass in my palm. It still trembled north, steady and sure. All my life, I said quietly to Thomas, I thought honor was about proving myself. Turns out, it's about peace. He slipped an arm around me. Peace earned is the rarest kind. I looked back at the city lights, each one a small signal home. Maybe forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened, I said. Maybe it's choosing not to let it define you anymore. So if you're listening, if someone ever made you feel small, unseen, or unworthy, remember this. You don't need their permission to shine. You don't need their apology to heal. And sometimes the quietest victories, the steady breath after the storm, echo the longest. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who's still waiting to steer through their own tide. Because every family deserves one more chance to salute what they once failed to see.